What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected actors sits down with daytime television's most controversial panel? You won't believe what unfolds when Denzel Washington faces off against The View hosts in what becomes the most explosive confrontation in the show's history. The tension starts simmering from the very first question, but nobody could have predicted the nuclear meltdown that was about to erupt on live television. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below because you're not going to believe what unfolds when these powerhouse personalities clash in the most dramatic fashion imaginable. The studio atmosphere was already electric as Denzel Washington made his entrance onto The View set. Fresh off promoting his latest directorial project, the Academy Award winner appeared relaxed and gracious, flashing his trademark smile as he settled into the guest chair. The audience erupted in thunderous applause, clearly thrilled to see the legendary actor up close. But beneath the surface pleasantries, something felt different today. The hosts exchanged glances that seemed loaded with anticipation, as if they had been planning something special for their distinguished guest. Whoopi Goldberg opened the segment with what appeared to be standard promotional fare, asking Denzel about his latest film and his journey behind the camera. The conversation flowed smoothly at first, with Washington delivering thoughtful responses about his craft and artistic vision. Joy Behar chimed in with seemingly innocent questions about his career highlights, while Sunny Hostin nodded approvingly at his answers. Even Sarah Haynes appeared genuinely engaged, asking about his family and personal life with apparent warmth. But then the shift began, subtle at first, but unmistakably deliberate. Alyssa Farah Griffin leaned forward with a question that made Washington's posture stiffen almost imperceptibly. Denzel, you've been pretty quiet about political issues lately. Some people are saying that successful Black actors have a responsibility to use their platform more actively. What's your response to critics who say you're not doing enough? The question hung in the air like a loaded weapon. Washington's smile didn't waver, but something flickered behind his eyes. Well, I've always believed that my job is to tell stories that resonate with people. I think art speaks louder than politics sometimes. When you start making everything about politics, you lose the humanity in the story. Joy Behar jumped in immediately, her voice carrying an edge that hadn't been there moments before. But don't you think that's a luxury you have as a successful person? I mean, when people are suffering, when democracy is under attack, isn't silence really complicity? The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Washington's jaw tightened slightly, though he maintained his composure. I don't think I've been silent about anything that matters. I've made films about Malcolm X, about fences, about the struggles of Black Americans. My work speaks for itself. Sunny Hostin seized the moment, her legal background evident in the precision of her attack. But those are historical pieces, Denzel. What about right now? What about the current political climate? You have influence, you have a voice. Some would argue that making period pieces is actually safer than addressing contemporary issues. The accusation hit its mark. Washington's eyes narrowed, and for the first time since sitting down, his diplomatic facade began to crack. Safer? You think making a film about Malcolm X was safe? You think telling the story of Troy Maxson was safe? I've spent my entire career taking risks, telling stories that needed to be told. Whoopi tried to maintain control, but there was steel in her voice now. Nobody's questioning your past work, Denzel, but we're living in unprecedented times. When you see what's happening in this country, when you see the attacks on voting rights, on women's rights, on basic democracy itself, how can you not feel compelled to speak out more directly? Washington leaned back in his chair, his media-trained smile now completely gone. You know what I find interesting? I come here to talk about my art, about a film I've poured my heart into, and within minutes we're talking about my supposed political obligations. Maybe that's part of the problem right there. The hosts exchanged quick glances, and Joy Behar pounced on his response like a prosecutor sensing weakness. So you think discussing the state of our democracy is a problem? You think wanting to hear from influential figures about the issues affecting all Americans is unreasonable? I think, Washington said, his voice growing firmer, that assuming every Black actor needs to be a political spokesperson is pretty presumptuous. I think reducing my entire body of work to whether or not I tweet enough about current events is diminishing. Sarah Haynes tried to interject with what seemed like a peacemaking gesture, but her words only added fuel to the fire. I think what everyone's trying to say is that your voice matters, Denzel. People look up to you. Washington's response was swift and pointed, and I take that responsibility seriously, which is exactly why I don't shoot my mouth off about every political issue of the day. I think before I speak. I consider the weight of my words. The implication was clear, and it didn't go unnoticed by the panel. Alyssa Farah Griffin's expression hardened. Are you suggesting that those of us who do speak out regularly aren't thinking before we speak? The question crackled with tension, and suddenly the promotional interview had transformed into something far more dangerous. Washington paused, clearly realizing he had crossed into more treacherous territory, but his next words showed he wasn't backing down. I'm suggesting that there's a difference between having something meaningful to say and having something to say meaningfully. The silence that followed was deafening. The audience, which had been enthusiastically applauding just minutes earlier, now sat in stunned quiet, sensing they were witnessing something unprecedented. The cameras continued rolling, capturing every micro-expression, every loaded pause, every sign that this interview was spiraling completely out of control. Sonny Hostin's voice cut through the tension like a blade. That sounds like you're making a judgment about people who choose to be more vocal about social justice issues. That sounds like you're suggesting some of us are just noise. Washington met her gaze directly, his composure intact, but his words carrying unmistakable steel. I'm suggesting that volume doesn't equal substance. And I'm suggesting that maybe, just maybe, some people confuse being loud with being right. The battle lines were now clearly drawn, and what had started as a routine celebrity interview was about to explode into something none of them could control. Joy Behar's face flushed red as she processed Washington's cutting remark. Her voice rose an octave, abandoning any pretense of professional composure. Excuse me? Are you seriously sitting here lecturing us about substance? We've been fighting for progressive causes while you've been sitting in your mansion staying silent. The audience gasped audibly. This wasn't just an interview anymore. This was warfare playing out on live television. Washington's eyes flashed with a dangerous intensity that anyone who knew him well would recognize as a warning sign. But the hosts were too deep in their attack mode to notice. My mansion? Washington's voice was eerily calm, which somehow made it more threatening. That's interesting. So now my success is being used against me? I worked for everything I have. I came from nothing, and I built something. But apparently that disqualifies me from having opinions about how change really happens. Whoopi tried to regain control of the situation, but her attempt at mediation came across as condescending. Nobody's attacking your success, Denzel. But with great success comes great responsibility. Uncle Ben taught us that. The Spider-Man reference was meant to lighten the mood, but it had the opposite effect. Washington's expression darkened considerably. Did you just Uncle Ben me? Did you really just quote a comic book character to lecture a grown black man about responsibility? That's your level of discourse. The studio fell into an uncomfortable silence. Even the production crew behind the cameras seemed frozen by the escalating hostility. Sarah Haynes attempted damage control, her voice shaky with nervous energy. I think what Whoopi meant was, I know exactly what she meant. Washington cut her off sharply. And I know exactly what all of you mean. You want me to be your dancing monkey. You want me to say the right things, think the right thoughts, support the right causes in the right way at the right time. Well, here's some news for you. I don't dance for anybody. Alyssa Farah Griffin's political instincts kicked in, and she launched into what sounded like a prepared talking point. This isn't about dancing, Denzel. This is about using your privilege responsibly. When you have the platform you have, staying neutral isn't really neutral. It's choosing the side of the oppressor. Washington stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor with a harsh sound that cut through the tension. The sudden movement startled everyone, including the audience, who weren't sure if they should applaud, gasp, or remain silent. Oppressor. His voice was now dangerously quiet. Lady, I've done more for my community than you'll do in 10 lifetimes. I've put kids through college. I've funded programs. I've told stories that matter. But because I don't tweet enough for your liking, I'm on the side of the oppressor. Sonny Hostin, perhaps sensing that things were spiraling beyond recovery, made one last attempt to justify their attack. We're not talking about charity, Denzel. We're talking about advocacy. We're talking about using your voice when democracy itself is at stake. Washington began pacing behind his chair, his hands gesturing with increasing animation. Democracy is at stake? You know what's really at stake? The idea that a black man can think for himself. The idea that success doesn't come with a requirement to be your political puppet. The accusation hung heavy in the air. Joy Behar's face contorted with indignation. Political puppet? How dare you? We've been fighting for civil rights since. Since before what? Washington spun around to face her directly. Since before I was born? Since before I was successful? Since before I had the audacity to think I could make my own decisions about when and how to speak. Whoopi's attempt to restore order was desperate now. Denzel, please sit down. Let's all take a breath, and no. His voice boomed across the studio. I'm done taking breaths. I'm done being polite while you people tear me down for not being the kind of black man you want me to be. You want to talk about oppression? This is it right here. This expectation that I owe you my thoughts, my voice, my political soul. The hosts exchanged panicked glances. This had gone far beyond anything they had planned or expected. The interview was completely off the rails, and Washington showed no signs of backing down. Sarah Haynes made one final, desperate attempt at reconciliation. I think there's been a misunderstanding here. We all respect your work. We all respect your choices. Washington's laugh was bitter and sharp. Respect? You ambushed me. You brought me here under false pretenses to lecture me about my political obligations. You questioned my commitment to my own people. You suggested I'm complicit in oppression. And now you want to talk about respect? Alyssa, Farrah Griffin, perhaps realizing the gravity of what was unfolding, tried to walk back some of the hostility. We didn't mean to suggest that you're not committed to important causes. We just think that in times like these, Washington interrupted, his voice rising again. Every time is times like these according to you people. There's always a crisis, always an emergency that requires me to abandon my principles and join your chorus. Well, here's a thought. Maybe the reason this country is so divided is because people like you can't accept that good people might disagree with your methods. Sunny Hostin's legal training kicked in, and she tried to pin him down with prosecutorial precision. So you're saying our methods are wrong? You're saying that speaking out against injustice is the wrong approach. Washington stopped pacing and fixed her with a stare that could have cut glass. I'm saying that demanding conformity of thought isn't fighting injustice. It's perpetuating it. I'm saying that the moment you tell someone they have to think a certain way because of their race or their success or their platform, you've become exactly what you claim to be fighting against. The silence was deafening. The audience sat in stunned bewilderment, unsure whether they were witnessing television history or television disaster. The hosts looked at each other with expressions ranging from shock to anger to barely concealed panic. Joy Behar, perhaps sensing that they had lost control entirely, made one last desperate attempt to salvage the situation. I think we're all passionate about these issues, and sometimes passion can lead to passion. Washington's voice was now ice cold. This wasn't passion. This was an execution. You brought me here to destroy me because I don't fit your narrative. Because I won't be your token. Because I have the audacity to think that my decades of work and my lifetime of experience might give me the right to form my own opinions. The battle had reached its peak, but somehow everyone in that studio knew that the most explosive moment was still to come. Whoopi Goldberg made one final attempt to assert control, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had moderated countless heated discussions. But there was desperation creeping into her tone now. Denzel, I think we need to step back here. This conversation has gotten away from all of us. Washington turned to face her with a look that could have melted steel. Has it? Or is this exactly where you wanted it to go? You think I don't know what this is? You think I haven't seen this playbook before? He gestured toward the entire panel with sweeping contempt. The coordinated attack, the moral grandstanding, the attempt to shame me into submission. This is character assassination disguised as social justice. Joy Behar's face was now completely flushed, her voice cracking with indignation. Character assassination? We're asking you to use your influence for good. We're asking you to stand up for what's right. What's right according to who? Washington's voice boomed across the studio, causing several audience members to visibly flinch. According to you? According to this panel of privileged women who think they get to decide what every black man in America should think and say. You want to talk about privilege? Let's talk about the privilege of sitting in judgment of others while contributing nothing but noise to the conversation. Sunny Hostin shot to her feet, her legal instincts fully engaged now. Contributing nothing? We've dedicated our careers to fighting for justice, to giving voice to the voiceless. Voiceless. Washington's laugh was sharp and humorless. The only voice you want to give anyone is your own. You don't want to amplify voices, you want to control them. You want everyone to sing from your hymnal, march to your drum, think your thoughts. And when someone like me refuses to be your puppet, you try to destroy them on national television. Alyssa Farah Griffin stood up as well, her political background evident in her attempt to reframe the argument. This isn't about control, Denzel. This is about responsibility. When you have a platform, when you have influence, don't you dare lecture me about responsibility. Washington's voice reached a crescendo that seemed to shake the very foundations of the studio. I've been responsible my entire life. I've been responsible to my craft, to my family, to my community, to the stories I tell. But I refuse to be responsible to your political agenda. The audience was now completely silent, as if they were witnessing something sacred and terrible at the same time. The cameras continued to roll, capturing every word, every gesture, every moment of this unprecedented meltdown. Sarah Haynes, tears visible in her eyes now, made one last desperate plea. Please, can we all just— No. Washington cut her off with finality. We can't just anything. Because this isn't about having a conversation. This was an ambush from the moment I sat down. You brought me here under false pretenses to humiliate me, to break me down, to force me into your political box. And when I refused to fit, you tried to shame me into compliance. He began moving toward the edge of the set, his movements deliberate and powerful. You want to know what's really destroying this country? It's not political differences. It's not even hatred. It's the arrogance of people like you who think you have the moral authority to tell everyone else how to think, how to feel, how to use their voice. Whoopi made one final, desperate attempt to salvage the situation. Denzel, please don't leave like this. We can work this out. We can have a real conversation. Washington stopped and turned back to face the panel one final time. His voice was now deadly calm, which somehow made his words even more devastating. A real conversation? You had your chance for a real conversation. Instead, you chose to conduct a public execution. You chose to attack my character, question my commitment to my people, and suggest that my success somehow disqualifies me from having independent thoughts. He took a step closer to the panel, his presence commanding the entire studio. But here's what you didn't count on. You thought you could intimidate me. You thought you could shame me into submission. You thought wrong. Joy Behar, perhaps realizing that they had pushed too far, attempted one last apology. If we've offended you in any way, offended? Washington's voice was incredulous. You think this is about being offended? This is about principle. This is about the fundamental right of every person to think for themselves without being subjected to ideological bullying. He began walking toward the exit, his movement creating a wave of murmurs throughout the audience. You know what the real tragedy is here? You had one of the most respected actors in Hollywood sitting at your table, willing to talk about his art, his craft, his journey. Instead, you chose to make it about politics. You chose confrontation over conversation. You chose destruction over dialogue. Sunny Hostin called out desperately, "Where are you going?" "We're in the middle of a show." Washington paused at the edge of the set and turned back one final time. "I'm going where every person should go when they're being attacked for their principles. Away from the attackers. You want to continue this conversation? Do it without me. You want to tear someone down for not conforming to your worldview? Find another target." Alyssa Farah Griffin made one last attempt to stop the disaster. "Denzel, please, let's find a way to what?" His voice carried across the studio with crystal clarity. "Find a way for me to surrender my integrity? Find a way for me to apologize for thinking independently? Find a way for me to pretend this ambush was somehow justified." He shook his head with finality. "I've spent 40 years building a reputation based on dignity, respect, and artistic integrity. I'm not going to let a panel of political bullies destroy that in 40 minutes. With that, Denzel Washington straightened his jacket, looked directly into the main camera, and delivered his final words to the audience with the gravitas that had made him a legend. To everyone watching at home, remember this moment. Remember what happens when independent thought is treated as betrayal. Remember what happens when success is used as a weapon against you. And remember that you always have the right to walk away from people who don't respect your dignity. He turned and walked off the set with the confident stride of a man who had just won the most important battle of the day. The audience erupted in confused applause, unsure of what they had just witnessed, but somehow understanding that they had seen something significant. The panel sat in stunned silence, the weight of what had just occurred settling over them like a heavy blanket. The cameras continued rolling, capturing their shocked expressions and the empty chair that had, just moments before, held one of Hollywood's most respected figures. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity before Whoopi finally found her voice. "We'll be right back," she managed to say. Though her voice lacked its usual authority as the show cut to commercial, the studio remained eerily quiet. The hosts looked at each other with expressions ranging from shock to regret, to defiance, but none of them spoke. They had gotten exactly what they thought they wanted, a confrontation with a major celebrity. But they had also gotten something they hadn't bargained for, a masterclass in dignity under fire from a man who refused to be broken by their attack. The empty chair stood as a monument to what had just transpired, a reminder that sometimes the most powerful response to an ambush is simply to refuse to participate in your own destruction.